Welcome to 7 Prophecies of the Future, a future studies program series that will take you on a transdisciplinary journey of discovery into the unknown. Each episode brings together 2 guests who will act as oracles, revealing a secret passcode to enter a realm filled with poetic images and intriguing phenomena. All oracles are part of a wider divinatory speculative endeavor, the Future Studies program. They will share their destinations of the future on the occasion of the Venice Biennale Italian Virtual Pavilion 2021, and I, Andrea Cetrulo, will be guiding you through the corridors that lead us to these oracles of futurity. On this episode, we will enter the domain of prophecy, divination, futurity, the projected, and the real. Passcode, oracle. Oracle is often defined as a person, such a priestess, through whom a god was believed to speak. But what shapes can an oracle take, and how has the concept itself mutated according to the context in which it was used? To answer this, we have invited Ana Longo, author of the Future Prophecy Lab on the Future Studies program, who is also a philosopher focusing on themes of rationality, fiction, and speculative theory, and Dejan Lukic, professor at the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts, with an interest in mysticism, charisma, and enchantment. Welcome, Ana and Dejan. As usual, I will start the first episode by asking you to respond as the oracles that you are. So these are the questions that Nandita and Arshin from the previous episode of 7 Prophecies of the Future had for you. And this one is for Ana specifically. And the question is, what is the value of oracles in the age of quantum artificial intelligence? Ana, would you like to respond to this?
I'm just responding, telling that it would be unfold during my talk from the beginning to the end, and in particular at the end, I will take into account the Matrix oracle, and she's an artificial intelligence program. So I will try to address the difference between this kind of oracle, artificially intelligent oracle, and which is a predictive machine, and the Delphi oracle, who is working according to another kind of logic, which I will explain.
Thank you, Ana. Now, this question goes for Dejan. So, Dejan, Arshin's question is, who are the goals of our present existence, and what do they do without bodies and minds?
Thank you, Andrea. This is a tricky question of Arshin's, and I have to modify it a little bit in order to answer it. So as I was thinking about the answer, 3 things came to my mind. Number 1 is that ghouls are connected to evil, cannibalism, anthropophagia in general, traditionally or classically speaking. Now, if I think about ghouls today, for me, I don't think we need to be afraid of any figure of the ghoul, because what we have to be afraid of is the spirit of the age, which has ghoulish affinities or ghoul-like qualities. That is to say, we as a collective are ghoulish. This is why ghouls in the movies and the comic books are seen as concrete figures, while we embody the characteristics of ghouls in our own hearts. So that's one thing, the connection to evil and the spirit of the age, which is ghoulish rather than actual figures. The other thing that popped up in Arshin's question for me is the term that he used, which is interregnum, which he seems very interested in, and so am I. So similarly, I was thinking about that term, and it seems to me that we live inside the interregnum period all the time, which is defined as a period when normal government is suspended between successive regimes. So it's hard for me to think of what is a normal government today. So what I see is a permanent state of interregnum with shifting intensities. Political events rising and falling constantly, just like different wildfires on the planet. So again, I don't see a particular figure of the ghoul. I see a permutation of the characteristics in the society itself. The same is with the interregnum. I don't see it as an interval, but actually as our own existence in which we live, as a prolonged interval or an infinite interval. And then the final element is the question of the body and mind, or what kind of goals would that be without bodies and minds, or what do they do? This is hard for me to summon, and Arshin would, give you a better answer. But for me, there is no existence without body and mind of anything. So it's not a question of if they have bodies and minds, but just a question of what type of body and mind is it. I assume we're talking about non-human bodies or hybrid bodies or cyber bodies, but even a human body I would like to see as inhuman, permeated with viruses, all kinds of microorganisms, inhuman ideas, and so on. So, I think human is a designation that is just a mask. But yeah, in general, I would say there is no reality without a body and mind. So even when people think about, life after death, they think about some spiritual body. Even if there is no spiritual body, there is some kind of a cosmic consciousness. I had to use that word, of course. So body and mind of some sort in some elemental form always exists. Now, just finally, I'll say I agree with Arshin's disposition, which is a positive disposition towards goals, and this is what he's trying to do. I think turn them into positive figures. For me, in a sense, in this sense, that for a creative gesture to occur, politically, artistically, in any way, there has to be some kind of a contract with the devil, which is to say, there has to be some implementation of molecule of evil. I can't get into the question of what constitutes evil now, but I think if you followed previous conversation, this will probably make sense to you. Evil as some sort of a counter narrative. So this has always been the case, by the way. This is nothing new or prophetic. Artists, writers, in a way, make that contract by refusing to compromise, and it leads them, into all kinds of pathways. So, in any sense, that could be called ghoul-like tendency, this desire for contract with the devil. Period.
Now I'd like us to expand on the concept of oracle by inviting you to share, you both, a mythic representation or manifestation of this concept. So can we start with you, Dejan, perhaps? and your image of choice?
Oh yeah, just before I show the image and enter into the images and the technicalities here, let me just define a little bit what I pulled out oracle to be, and then Anna will, I'm sure, open up the intricacies of it in more detail. So on a most basic level, which is a known definition, oracle is a person or agency providing prophetic predictions. One should add here, inspired by deities. This, I think, for us is more and more irrelevant, this element, inspired by deities, but we can talk about that, and I'm sure it will come up in the example. So I like this term, agency, more than a person, agency providing prophetic predictions, because the person, while predicting the future, turns into something other than herself, a possessed entity or an impersonal force of mediation. So I would like to point that out. Again, this is for me. Oracle is an individual traditionally, of course, but in the act of, in the oracular event, in the oracular happening, he or she is really an impersonal force of mediation. So the oracle appears in all forms of religion, from monotheism to animism to polytheism, even in atheism. I would say, if we take that speeches of revolutionaries were predictions of the future political systems, which they were. In that regard, we can say that revolutionaries in all ages are also carrying these oracular characteristics. So predicting the future through speech is inscribing it as a reality. I think that's the difference from oracles and non-oracles, us regular human beings, that we speak about the future, but that future is not really inscribed. It's a speculation which may or may not happen. Most of the times it doesn't happen, or it happens because we're just referring to something other people have said many times before. So the word oracle itself means to speak in Latin. So it's a particular form of utterance. What kind of utterance? A rant, a whisper, sometimes accompanied by grunting and inhuman sounds. But important to say, this utterance is not an interpretation. It is not hermeneutical, because the oracles are not seers. They're not wise women and wise men, but rather voiced portals through which messages of God are streamed. So to put it poetically, we could call them mouthpieces of gods. There's something tragic about this, of course, being enslaved by the divine that speaks through you. So the first example is the most famous example of the Pithia in Delphi, who in ancient Greece, who exerted enormous influence on the Hellenic culture and was the highest authority in an otherwise completely male-dominated society. So it's an interesting paradox. So this is just the site itself where the Oracle of Delphi operated. The myth is tied to the myth of so-called Sibyls, or female prophets, which were found in ancient Greece, Asia Minor, which is today's Turkey, Southern Europe, as well as Libya, Egypt, and other parts of the world around 8th century BCE. But of course, we can also assume that prehistoric humans already had these prophetic proclivities. For to be alive means being oriented towards the future in some sense. So I would speculate that as soon as humans started to utter certain speech, oracular expressions occurred. Now I'll leave this, and I think Anna will speak about this relationship too. I just wanted to mention this, how this myth was employed in the most interesting way for me in a book, which is a tiny little work of fiction called The Sibyl by a Swedish writer, Per Lagerkvist. This is, I think it was originally published in 1956. Totally forgotten book and writer, even though he won the Nobel Prize. So the book is based on this Delphic prophecies and the Sibyls that inhabited, particularly one priestess or former priestess or Sibyl who is now living in disgrace outside of the town, on a mountain above the temple, with her son, who is not clear what exactly he is. We get the sense that he is not human, and later on it starts to unfold that this is a son that she had with the god that she was serving. And the whole book is her discussion with the wanderer who came to her house to ask her questions. But she is a retired Sibyl, retired prophetess, and she talks about her experience and her life. The beautiful thing is here that the myth, classical myth of the Sibyl, is a little bit deranged because it deals with her betrayal of the mystical and erotic relations with the god that gave her this oracular proclivity. So I'll just mention a few more things. It's the betrayal of the divine, which leads to punishment that we see here. And the other thing which is really incredibly described, that the actual place where the oracular proclamations happen is a crack in the earth from which the vapors are rising. Now, scientists and archaeologists speculate that these gas vapors that are described in literature could have been petrochemicals that intoxicated the person who was sitting above it. But in any case, what I find fascinating in the betrayal is a form of micropolitical gesture or a rebellion. And in the second, this hyper-reliance on geological phenomenon or a micro-environmental gesture. Now, both of these two examples lead us to the present in which gods have receded. And as I said at the beginning, the oracular is not really inspired by the gods anymore. I think the way in which we see the oracular elements now is in meteorology and weather prediction and speculations of what will happen to the earth through this knowledge of the weather and the environment.
Many thanks, Dan. So now, Anna, are you ready to share your contribution with us for the mythic example on the oracle?
So yes, this is an image from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, is the Delphic Sibyl. So my first example about the oracle is coming from Plato, the Apology of Socrates. So I put some quotation that you can read while I'll explain or I introduce this topic. So the Apology of Socrates is a Socratic dialogue written by Plato, and in this dialogue, Socrates is defending himself in front of people accusing him of corrupting the youth. So it's a trial for impiety and corruption. Impiety because they also accuse him to adore false divinities like new demons rather than the official gods of the city of Athens. So Socrates says to the court that these accusations are really old and they arise from kind of gossip about him and a lot of prejudice against him. So for Socrates, the problem is that they are accusing him to be a sophist rather than a philosopher. So in his defense, Socrates is trying to show that he's not a sophist, but he is a real philosopher. So this is the main argument of his defense. So Socrates argues that he cannot be mistaken for a sophist because sophists are wise men and they are thought to be wise by people. And so that's the reason why people pay them for teaching philosophy, and they pay them a lot. They pay sophists a lot. And Socrates says, I'm a poor man, I'm not rich. So people do not consider me as a wise man, as a sophist. So he tried to show that he's not a wise man. A wise man, according to the meaning which is given by the Athenians to this word. So in order to show that he's not a wise man, he told a story, and he told the story about the beginning of his philosophical inquiry. So this beginning of his philosophical inquiry, it happened when a friend of him, who is called Chaerephon, went to the oracle of Delphi and asked the Pithia if there was anyone wiser than Socrates. And the prophetess said, there is no one who is more wise than Socrates. So when Chaerephon told this to Socrates, he was really puzzled and said, but what? Why the oracle is saying that I'm the wisest man while I feel I'm not the wisest man? So it was really doubtful, because on the one hand, he knew that the oracle cannot lie, or usually doesn't lie. But on the other hand, he felt that he was not the wisest man. So he started his inquiry in order to find if there was somebody wiser than him. So he started questioning people around him in order to see if they were actually wise people. They can be defined as wise people. And this is the beginning of Socrates' inquiry. And anytime he met somebody like politicians, like craftsmen, and also artists and any kind of social category, he showed them that they were no wise, and if he thought that they were not, even though they thought they were. So people started to hate him because he showed them that they were no wise as they thought. And so this is the reason why he was hated by people. But young people adore Socrates because of this, and they started following him. Anyway, this kind of quest didn't lead Socrates to earn any money. He was really poor because he was hated by anybody because of his inquiry. Anyway, since he didn't find anybody who was wiser than him, he finally realized that basically the prophecy was correct. And the prophecy was correct because human wiseness is not real knowledge and is nothing with respect to the knowledge of the gods. So no human can be acknowledged, can be wise, and this kind of knowledge that we have on earth is nothing. It doesn't have any real value. And so Socrates realized that he was wiser than the others because he knew that he wasn't wise, that he didn't have any kind of knowledge. So what is interesting to me in this myth is that Socrates' philosophical inquiry has been originated by a prophecy, and so philosophy itself can be considered as the fulfillment of a prophecy. So philosophy at the beginnings of the Socratic teaching is the fulfillment of a prophecy, and philosophy itself can be seen as a prophecy. To understand this, we have to make the distinction between the philosophical activity and the activity of a sophist. So the sophists make good predictions that allow them to have success in life. So they are strategic and they know people enough to be able to manipulate them in order to obtain personal profit. On the contrary, the philosophical activity is a prophecy about the possibility of looking for truth that are not functional to practical ends. So a prophecy about the capacity of seeing that all we know about the sensible world, all our empirical knowledge is not real knowledge, since true knowledge concerns ideas or the divine source of existence. So philosophers, like prophets, are said to be inspired by gods. And this means that they look at reality as the effect of a superior destiny. And this destiny is the destiny of the soul. So the soul saw real light before incarnation. So in this myth, the soul belongs to the realm of ideas, and then they fall on earth, they are embodied, and they forget about their knowledge. And they think they know because they are able to live in the world, but they actually forgot real truth. So the destiny of the soul is to read the signs in reality, to remember, to recollect what they saw before incarnation. And in this way, we can regain wings and to go back to the realm where they belong. So the philosophical prophecy is a prophecy about the soul regaining the wings in order to go back to this unspeakable truth of the ideas. So the soul saw this real light before incarnation, and the philosophical prophecy is then that they will be liberated. So they will be liberated again from the needs of the body and from the terrestrial preoccupations to contemplate ideas. So to fulfill this prophecy means to mistrust functional knowledge in order to contemplate what cannot be actually known, but which is the source of anything can be actually known. So the object of knowledge of wise men according to opinion. So the prophecy is the fulfillment. The prophecy is fulfilled when the soul remembers what it saw before being embodied. And this obscure and oracular vision can only be stimulated by ambiguous signs, so like beauty, for example, and its content cannot be actually said by ordinary language. So it can only be said by poetic expressions, like the verses of the oracle. So the oracle in Delphi just spoke in verses in an ambiguous way. And another way to express this is myth in Plato. So anytime in Plato there are some very difficult speculative concepts, he cannot tell about them. He cannot explain that, but he can use myths. And this is a kind of poetic, fictional way of addressing a truth which are unspeakable according to logic language, which is the language of ordinary knowledge. So this is evident if we consider another Socratic dialogue, which is the Phaedrus. So here again you have image of the Delphi prophetess and quotes from the dialogue. In the Phaedrus is about the destiny of the soul. So it's about love, but it's also about the destiny of the soul. Here in the passage that I selected, divine madness is explained to be the inspiration which allows one to decipher signs in reality. For example, beauty. So the lover discover beauty in the body of the loved being, but this beauty is not functional to itself, it's not just functional to satisfy desires, but it's functional, it's read as a sign, which is functional to recollect ideas, to recollect what the soul saw before be incarnated. This is a way of fulfilling the destiny of the soul, which is to grow wings again in order to fly to the realm of ideas to which it belongs. So this divine madness, according to Plato in this dialogue, is shared by prophets, poets, and philosophers. So you have here the distinction between madness like an illness and madness like divine madness, which is the inspiration for prophets. It's also the inspiration for the poets. So it's the madness coming from the muses. And at the end, it's also described as the madness of the philosopher. So the philosopher is inspired by this madness in the same way as a prophet or a poet is. And according to Plato, the philosopher is the one who is more enlightened, so is more likely to grow his wings. And so true philosophers are like poets and prophets inspired by the divine madness, and they read signs in reality, not to know this reality, but to fulfill the destiny of the soul, which is the one of contemplating ideas. So the true philosopher's speech is not meant to persuade, like the Sophist discourses, but it's meant to orient people to fulfill the destiny of their soul. So they prophesize the destiny of thought. And so they are considered in some way mad or not wise, like the Sophist or like the people who are highly considered in society for the efficacy of their decisions. Okay, so this is my first example, philosophy as prophecy.
Excellent, Anna, thank you very much. Super interesting. I think it's also a very relevant introduction to the oracle, as it becomes clear how poetic images are so important and closely linked through, in this case, the inauguration of Western philosophy. As we know, Eastern philosophy has more of a tradition of, the thought image relation in that sense, and the poetic direct experience rather than the rational or the ideal. But I was going to say that maybe we can move on at this point to the artistic image. So what is your artistic example, Dejan, in this case?
This is a sea monk. It's an ukiyo-e woodblock print from a Japanese artist, Utagawa Kuniyoshi, from 1845. And it addresses the story of the sea monk called Umibozu, who was also a spirit in Japanese folklore. And you can see it there looming prominently. The monk is said to capsize the ship of anyone who dares to speak to it. He flips and overturns the boats, which to him look like toys. Sometimes he asks a riddle, and if the answer is satisfactory, he let the ship be. There is something humorous in this image and the figure of the mercurial spirit who doesn't hide his dislike for people's chatter. In other words, an utterance has to be worthy of the sea and the waves and the spirit. This I find particularly relevant since we said and mentioned that oracle is primarily a form of speech. So in this sense, in this regard, the utterance has to be like an answer to a riddle, or in other words, it has to be oracular. That's it.
Very intriguing. I had never seen this image before.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So Exhalation is a short story, and it's the report of a scientific experiment that leads to a surprising discovery on the nature of cognition. So the researcher who is conducting this scientific experiment belongs to a peculiar race of mechanical thinking beings. So we really don't know who they are, but they are kind of strange mechanical beings. Who inhabit a world, the inner nature of which will be revealed once they will arrive at a full understanding of the function of the brain. So this protagonist tells the story about his experiment. So he constructed a device to open his own skull, and he put a sort of microscope behind his open head, so he could look inside his head while he was analyzing the mechanism of cognition mechanism. So I was really observing his brain, observing himself. So he discovered that there was a really complex architecture in the brain, and basically it was built with really tiny metallic, golden leaves, and memories were inscribed on these leaves. But basically, the more astonishing thing was that everything was moving because of fluxes of air moving these leaves. So the inscriptions of memories on these golden leaves were basically the edges of little conducts for making the air flow. So an inscription was basically the instruction to move the leaves, which were moving according to these air fluxes. So thought was this, the result of these movements originated by the connection between thoughts, which were these inscriptions on the leaves. And so anytime there was a new thought, there was a re-inscription of the leaves. And so everything was kind of changing and moving in the brain. But he realized that the brain was a sort of computing machine for redirecting air currents, while thinking was the result of the movements of these leaves, and so forth were encoded on these moving golden plates. But then the protagonist realized that basically the condition for thinking is air. And what makes air move is a difference in pressure. So he realized that his world, which was a sort of closed world with a closed sky, like a container, was characterized by a difference in pressure between the low level and the high level. So there was this difference in pressure that made air flow from the low to the top. And so thoughts were caused by this flow of air moving from the bottom to the top of this closed world. And he realized that according to the law of entropy, the destiny of the world was to reach the equilibrium. So to reach the same pressure in the whole container. And this would be the end of thought, of course. So this equalization of pressure was the kind of equilibrium, entropic equilibrium of the world. So thought will end when this entropy will be actualized. And so he discovered that actually they noticed before, so at the beginning of the story, there is this event, and they were kind of realizing that they are thinking slowly than usually, and thinking is getting slower. And so he understood the reason why people are thinking slower in his world. And so he predicted scientifically. So it's the end. We are really close to the end, because anything we do, anything we think, any thought we have, we are increasing entropy, and we are accelerating the process toward the equilibrium, so toward entropy and the end of thought. So other people around him started trying to find solutions to this, like mechanical solution, but anytime they thought, they were increasing entropy rather than solving the problem. So he had another idea. And in this idea, I think he reveals himself as an artist rather than a scientist. So his idea was to write the short story. And the short story is meant to be a letter, which is addressed to visitors from another world, speculating that there were other kind of worlds like his world, and that this kind of other creatures from other world could have create a tunnel to use the air in his world to make it flow to their world, and so to keep on living. But he also thinks that they could have visited the planet. So this is his prophecy and his hope. So he addressed this visitor and saying, okay, so if you will visit us and you will find us like paralyzed, frozen, without no life, you can read the patterns which are inscribed in our brains, in our dead brains. So you can read our thoughts, and while reading our thoughts, you will assume the same patterns in your brain, which were the patterns of people living before. So they will bring a new life to thought, to thinking. And so this is his kind of prophecy. So he's addressing this letter to make thinking, to make memories, to make words, to live again in this future. And so I think this is the kind of prophecy that any artist makes while producing an artwork, which is not information which is useful to find a practical solution to a problem, and so in some way to contributing to the exploitation of resources, but it's a way to produce something which hunt spirits forever. So like ideas which are meant to survive in the mind of other people and to hunt them forever, for eternity. So an artwork in this sense, like this short story Exhalation, is a prophecy about the eternity of the life of an artwork, which, like an idea, can hunt the spirits forever and survive in eternity, despite the existential limits of the creator. And so this is my second example.
Thank you, Anna. Now our last example related to the oracle will be centered around an emergent phenomenon that has caught your attention. So, Dejan, would you share yours first, please?
Yes. My emergent phenomena that I chose to be emergent is a Spiderweb. This is an image I took a month ago on an island in Croatia called Dugi Otok, which an area of which was covered with enormous spider webs. This is my phone shot, so it's not very good, but you can get a little bit of a sense of this half hanging half bell, and just imagine dozens and dozens of them, one next to the other, hanging amongst this beautiful vegetation on a dry island. So I started thinking about this, and to what extent a spider could be an oracular creature, since it's making these amazing structures. This particular spider is called Argiope lobata, the species, and it populates Africa, Southern Europe, and Asia. Now, the much better image of these spiders than mine is from Thomas Saraceno, artist from Argentina, who's been working and studying and working with spiders for over a decade. To what end? In order to raise some form of Arachnean consciousness, which is an endeavor that I like very much, and I think he's being successful in it with all the work that he has done. Arachnean consciousness, one could say, is an extreme sense of otherness. Now, as you can see, this is one of his images. There are many, many of them, and this one just reminded me of the one that I saw in nature itself. He also made a 3D visualization of the spider web for the very first time. This is, of course, in collaboration with scientists. I forgot where exactly, but you can easily find it. This is a video of one of the spider webs in the boxes that he constructed. The web itself is a great enigma of bioengineering. It is lighter than air and with unusual elasticity. It's rich in vitamin K, which prevents bleeding. And even though it has been emergent for 100 million years, I consider them a novelty, since they contain some kind of mysterious purpose which exceeds myth and art for me. This is perhaps why scientists say that the most accurate image of the universe is a spider web. And this is also why the artist Saraceno called his app, which he developed for smartphones, Arachnomancy, and which you can download and use, and advertised it as, I quote, an invitation to attune to our sympoetic futures.
Thank you, Dejan. Now, Anna, are you ready to walk us through the oracle in the form of an emergent phenomenon?
Of course, I am. So my last example is from the movie The Matrix, and it's about this character of the oracle in Matrix. So if you remember the character in the movie, she's a black woman who is dressed in green and orange, like Michelangelo's Delphic Sibyl. So there is a reminder to the Delphic Sibyl, which is made explicit by the inscription on the door of the oracle house in the movie. So in the image you have Neo entering the oracle's house, and you see on the door Temek Noshe, which is know thyself, which is the motto which was inscribed in the temple in Delphi, where the Pithia was. So since the first scene, we have this connection between the matrix oracle and the Delphic oracle. And so now I'm going to answer in some way the question from the beginning, showing the difference between this matrix oracle, who is actually an artificial intelligence or an intelligent program, and the Delphic oracle. So I will address the value of a prophecy for today, which is a value which is can be assessed only once the difference is acknowledged, the difference with artificial intelligence predictions. There is in the Matrix movie first this parallel between the oracle, the matrix oracle, and the pretress in Delphi, and another parallel is so between Neo and Socrates, also because Neo doesn't know. So at the beginning, he's really insecure. He knows that he doesn't know. So he needs the oracle to orient himself. He's aware of his own ignorance. He just knows that something doesn't add up in the reality is living in. However, I think it's important to make a clear distinction between Neo and Socrates, and between the matrix oracle and the Delphic prophetess. So first of all, the matrix oracle is a program, so she's an artificial intelligence. The matrix oracle can predict people's behavior in the same way as predictive algorithms used by platforms like Amazon or Netflix can make predictions about the user's decisions. So the matrix oracle observes decisions of people in the matrix, connected to the matrix, in order to understand the preferences that they have. And so when she supposes that they have some preference, she can predict the pattern of behavior, supposing that the decisions are taken in order to maximize expected utility. So this is why the oracle tells Neo that he has to understand why he made some choices. So she's not saying to him, so there is a quotation there, you have already made the choice. You are here to understand why you have made it. And so this means you have to know what are your preferences. So for a rational agent, one of the conditions to make efficient decisions is to have a current set of preferences. So what is important to make choices which are functional to maximize expected utility is to be current in the ordering of preferences. So the oracle is just telling Neo, okay, you are a rational agent. You have to know which are your preferences, and your decisions are consequences of your preferences. So this is the framework in which the matrix oracle is thinking, is working. So the oracle in matrix can make hypotheses about people's choices, inducing preferences from observed decisions. And she can predict that Neo is the one because he observed his previous choices. So she can believe in the hypothesis of a pattern of action which is determined by a preference for freedom. But it's important to stress that freedom here is intended as a will to know about the causes of representations. So accordingly, Neo's inquiry can be said to be a scientific inquiry, meaning that he wants to understand the causes of phenomena. This leads him to successfully addressing that is living a simulation as the rest of humanity. So this inquiry, however, does not lead him to discover that the knowledge he had within the simulation is false, since most of the beliefs about the phenomenal world that he had in the simulation are still valid outside the simulation. So the knowledge that one has about the laws of nature, for example, the laws of physics inside the matrix, are the same outside the matrix. It's not a world with different laws. So most of the beliefs which are true inside the matrix are true also outside the matrix. So most of knowledge is valid inside and outside. And he will use this kind of knowledge that he had inside the matrix to defeat the machines outside the matrix in this kind of war. So the world outside the matrix is not only governed by the same laws which are valid in virtual reality, the same beliefs, but inside and outside the matrix, there is the same economically oriented competition which is going on. The only difference is that rather than fighting for personal success in society, outside the simulation, Neo has to fight against the machines that are exploiting humanity. So Neo is actually fighting for helping humans to maximize their expected utility and to share with the machine the exploitation of terrestrial resources rather than being exploited as resources for machine energies. So in some ways, like machines are exploiting humans, and humans do not know, but do not have this consciousness of being exploited by the machine. So they think that they make decision to maximize their utility, but they are manipulated by the machine. So Neo is like telling them, oh, you are exploited, so you have to defeat the machine, go and take your part of the natural resources rather than being exploited as a natural resources. So it's not a contradictory logic inside and outside the matrix. So it's not a freedom like there is a new kind of knowledge, a different kind of knowledge. It's just the same kind of logic inside and outside the matrix. So the matrix has been compared to Plato's allegory of the cave. However, the difference is that while Neo ends his inquiry by discovering that the shadows are caused by objects moved in front of a fire. So, you know, in the allegory of the cave, you have the slaves, the prisoners, which are chained, and they are facing a wall. On this wall, they see shadows, and these shadows are actually produced by objects which are moved by people passing between the back of the prisoners and a fire. So the shadows of the objects are projected on the wall, and people chained to see only the wall think that these shadows are real objects. So Neo is just unchaining himself, turning his head and seeing that basically the shadows are produced by objects moved by the machines to manipulate humans. But his inquiry ends there. So ends in showing to the people inside the cave that the mechanism of the cave is produced in this way, and that real things are these objects moved by the machines. On the contrary, in the real Plato allegory of the cave, there is another phase, and the phase is when the philosopher goes out of the cave and he looks at the sun, and the light of the sun is too strong; it cannot be looked at. So senses are inefficient to grasp it, and again, it's just the soul who can identify itself with this light. So in Plato, the philosopher accesses the light of the sun outside the cave. And this is the light of the divine madness we were talking about before. And this is the source of a totally different kind of knowledge, of a totally different kind of realm. So while Neo engages himself to allow humans to be freed from the chains of exploitation and to live as free men inside the cave of material reality, the Platonic philosopher aims to free souls from the cave, not only from the chains of illusion, but also from the chains of scientific knowledge of phenomenal reality. And of course, this means to free them not only from exploitation in the world, but from the game of the exploitation or the control of resources. So while the Matrix Oracle orients Neo decision in order to achieve peace with the machines, so the Oracle in Matrix is this artificial intelligence program, who is basically helping people in the Matrix who has preferences for freedom to go outside the program. And her goal is to create peace between humans and the machines. So the program has been rebooted many, many times, but humanity and machines, they were not ready for this. At the end with Neo, they are finally ready. So the Oracle basically is helping the achievement of this peace between humans and the machine. So she's basically suggesting Neo what to do in order to maximize anybody's utility. Not only humans' utility with this peace, because they will be freed, but also the machine's utility, because Neo sacrifice will kill Mr. Smith, who was kind of sort of cancer in the Matrix. He was duplicating himself like a cancer. Anybody utility is maximized by this compromise. So differently from this kind of Matrix Oracle, with suggesting practical solutions, the Delphic Oracle orients the philosopher to look into the sun and to live in conformity with another kind of truth, but has nothing to do with the maximization of terrestrial utility. So in Platonic terms, to go back to the source does not mean to access the code at the real cause of perceived reality. So to achieve, for example, a deeper scientific knowledge of phenomenal reality, because this reality is the cave. Rather, in Platonic terms, to go back to the source means to free the soul from what is believed to be knowledge, since scientific knowledge is knowledge of the cave structure, rather than of the unknowable origin of any possible contingent reality, of any possible cave. So while the Matrix Oracle as an artificial intelligence suggests rational decisions which are meant to maximize utility, the Delphic Oracle suggests that this kind of wise decisions are based on non-necessary beliefs, and that the real destiny of the soul is to be freed from the competition that humans takes for reality. Okay, this was my last example.
Well, amazing. There's so many archetypes of the Oracle to consider after this session. Much more than anyone might have imagined. But yeah, thank you so much, Anna and Dejan, for your generous time, thought-provoking contributions to this conversation, and more widely to the Future Studies program. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.